Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. Since Donald Trump's return to the White House, America's global leadership is once again being questioned. Tensions have emerged with Europe over NATO's defense spending, over trade, and over Washington's shifting role in global conflicts. Trump's tariffs have reignited the debate about whether the U.S. is stepping back from the very world order it helped create. And as new partnerships take place from the Gulf to the Pacific, is American leadership rolling back? And if so, who's filling the gap? Across the international institutions, questions are mounting about the durability of U.S. influence. Its trade policies and unilateral sanctions have forced other countries to find ways around the U.S. dollar. At the same time, the global South is pushing for a greater voice. Today, blocs like the BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization are expanding their reach and challenging old hierarchies. At this year's TRT World Forum, held under the theme The Global Reset, I sat down with Professor Amitav Acharya to explore whether the world is witnessing not just a transition in leadership, but a transformation of the global order.
My understanding of the future is deeply rooted in the past. And the main argument is that world order is no one's monopoly. It's not American monopoly, European monopoly. All civilizations, including Islam, India, China, Africa, contributed to the current world order. We are going through a period of momentous change, but it's not something that we say we haven't seen before. So speaking of the role of the United States, as you asked, Bill, the United States has always been divided, torn between a regional focus. I mean, look, the United States fought a war in Vietnam for nearly a decade. United States was in Korea. United States won the Pacific War in the Pacific, ended the Second World War in the Pacific. So I think the United States has always been both Atlantic and Pacific oriented. But since NATO and since the beginning of the Cold War, obviously, United States has been more Atlantic focused, and civilizationally, it's much more European than Pacific or Asian. So what's going to happen under Trump? What is happening under Trump? We are going through, there is no consistency in American foreign policy. It depends on what the president wants, the whims of the day. So he just came back from Asia and Pacific, so that's the big news. But then he was in Europe, that's the big news. I don't...
But those are news lines. I want to concentrate more on the more medium to long-term strategy, and especially if they're going to concentrate on the Pacific. And this rhetoric, we've been hearing this for a while. I mean, we haven't seen the shift, but we've been hearing it. Obviously, an area like the Middle East, which has been an area of concentration in the past, there's going to have to be a downgraded presence. So what's that going to mean for these regional actors, for the Saudis, for the Gulf countries, for Jordan, for Lebanon, for Israel, for Turkey?
Nobody depends on the U.S. for security guarantees than the Arab states and also Israel. And so the United States has a lot more leverage historically in this region. And also it's just it's a push and pull factor. So when the United States, despite all the things we hear about U.S. excesses of U.S. policy, the governments, the regimes will not give up on the United States. They depend on the United States. By the way, I did my doctorate on the U.S. policy on the Middle East. I know the history very well. So I think this is a different ballgame, and I don't think the United States can afford to disengage from the Middle East, but it will engage only in certain areas when there is a security of Israel, for example, is affected. Security of Saudi Arabia is. And it will maintain as close a relationship. It will resist any change in countries like Egypt, where if the regime is moving away from the US will intervene. So the constant, it all depends on the situation, but I don't see the United States moving away from the Middle East in any time soon.
I want to ask a little about Europe as well, because the United States wants more local solutions for European security rather than it be the post-World War II police that it has been over the past 70, 80 years. Now, is there this expectation that Europe should handle more of its own security And what is that going to mean for the United States? Is that going to mean a Pacific shift? And how is Europe going to be able to handle that?
So the whole idea of US, NATO, Europe relationship, there's a consistent pattern to it. The United States has always wanted Europe to do what they call burden sharing, spend more on its own defense. But there is a difference with Trump. Trump doesn't like alliances. Trump doesn't like multilateral alliances or multilateral institutions. So when he came, he not only, especially in the second term, he not only had denounced NATO, but he has actually talked about, it's basically the end of the idea of the West. When you are sanctioning two of the founding members of NATO, my interpretation is that this whole idea of the West, based on cultural, strategic, and economic commonness, is over. And that's what European leaders have been talking about too. So they have to be more self-reliant. Now, there has been now a pause in American disdain for NATO and Europe. Europe has been attacked by J.D. Vance, the vice president, for its values, for moving away from values. It's not just military strategic. It's an all-out attack on.
Oh, we are seeing a lot of this value-based diplomacy going on with leaders choosing other leaders as close allies based on their value system. But I want to actually touch upon something you just said. Trump doesn't like alliances. Is the age of these big blocs kind of over? Are we going to see something take its place?
Let me start by saying that Trump only cares about himself. He's a unilateralist, and he wants to do things bilaterally when it suits him. It's easier to control countries when they are dealing on a one-to-one basis rather than through the UN or even through the European Union for that matter. So multilateralism in the old sense, I don't think it's over because it's not for Trump to kill it. There has been in the past American presidents who have been unilateral, like George W. Bush, but the next president came back. But I think what we will be seeing, probably for the first time since 1945, that other countries, allies or friends alike, will lose trust in the US. The trust factor is gone. It will be very hard for Canadians to build trust in the US. The Danes to build trust in the US. So Trump has basically killed that off, and multilateralism will not die, but it's quite possible. And then you talk about unilateralism. I have this term called world minus one. Until Trump is out of the picture, and the next president may be a Democrat, maybe a more moderate Republican, has the time to do some sort of a damage control. The United States will remain distrusted, cannot be isolated. It's a big power, but it will be what I call world minus one, meaning cooperation will continue without the US being present, and maybe the US will come back one day. But I think we are in the world minus one moment.
Okay. You spend a lot of time thinking about the future world order. We're in Turkey right now, so I do want to ask you a question about Turkey. Where do you see it in this future world order? And also, what countries do you think will have a much bigger role in a future order than they do right now?
So my idea of a coming world order is not multipolar. Everybody talks about multipolar. I think multipolar is not the right way. It's a narrow way of defining world with economic power, military power. What about ideas? What about interactions? What about your historical legacy? So here I have a term called multiplex. Multiplex is not about just power. It's about cultural influence, interactions, locationing. Turkey is very well positioned to be part of the multiplex world. Now, if you talk multipolarity, you basically, if Turkey talks about multipolarity, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You have no play in this. Multipolarity is all about big powers. The European multipolarity, maybe Ottoman Empire was kind of a secondary member of that. But right now, when you talk about multipolarity, you talk about US, you talk about India, China, of course, Russia, and France and Britain. Where does countries like Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, Turkey come in?
So rather than look at it as poles, should we look at these as tectonic plates of like-minded countries coming together?
I think the future world, what I call multiplex, will have great powers, middle powers, regional powers, but it won't be like autarkic spheres of influence, the way the Europeans had before, So we'll still have connectivity and connections across those so-called poles. And I think this is actually, in some ways, a smart, agile diplomacy from Turkey could actually go a long way to put itself right in the center, because you're right in the center, connecting Asia, Europe, Africa, and Eurasia. So take advantage of that and play the diplomacy, not taking sides on every issue with one country. In the old days, you would say, I want to side with the US or with the Soviet Union. Don't take any sides.
So do you have any predictions on who's really going to be emerging over the next decade or two?
In terms of which powers you mean?
Exactly. Which power right now will be better off in a better position in 10 to 15 years?
Well, you see China, of course, there is no question about it. Second largest economy by overall GDP, but for purchasing power parity, the number one economy. But I think that there is India, which has now overtaken Britain and Japan as the fourth largest economy. Sorry, it was Germany and maybe Japan. I think India will be in the top 5. Okay, let's put it this way. Indonesia is coming up. And then some of the emerging powers, Brazil and South Africa, play an important role. So in about 2050, more than half of this world of the major economies will be from non-Western countries. Nothing surprising, by the way, because that's what the world used to be.
Will the reserve currency still be the US dollar?
That is going to take a little bit of time, but it's not as impossible as people are saying.
Do you see a BRICS currency coming? Is that a possibility?
Well, because of the threats from Trump, and people don't want to aggravate what is already a very bad situation by taking this on too quickly. But I think it's a matter of time.
Will the threats scare off the BRICS countries, or will the threats make them double down on a currency?
In a little bit of both. Some countries are, they're playing a longer game and not a short-term game. So they will, of course, humor Trump and ease off on the alternative currency, but they will do it in an insidious, slow-motion way. And I think it is very clear now that the world under dollar dominance has been very unilateral. This is America's biggest remaining strength, really, and nobody wants to be totally dependent on that. So they will find a way.
So as the global balance of power shifts, the world is watching whether decades of American leadership is beginning to wane. Washington's allies and rivals alike are gauging how President Trump's foreign policy choices could redefine America's role on the world stage. To get a better perspective on how the U.S. is managing this shift, joining me now from Taipei is former Asia chairperson of Republicans Abroad, Ross Feingold. Ross, thanks for joining me. I mean, it's become very popular right now to question America's power, very popular to say that America is far away from its peak or zenith of power where it was in the 80s, 90s, and right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think you're really a great person to talk about this with, because you could be a microcosm for an argument on either side. I mean, you're Asia chairperson for Republicans Abroad. You're based in Taipei. So the argument could be made that America is very powerful, that a man like you is in Taipei projecting that power, or the argument could be that China has become so powerful that you are now in the Chinese sphere trying to at least capitalize on China's influence. Which one's correct?
I think you made a good point that people considered the U.S. at the zenith of its power in the 80s and the 90s after the Soviet Union. The U.S. led a successful coalition in the first Gulf War. And there was supposed to be the peace dividend with the end of the Cold War, and the U.S. was seen really as the leader politically, militarily, and economically. And over the past 25 years, regardless of who the U.S. president was, whether it was George W. Bush, followed by Obama, and then the first Trump administration, then Biden, and now Trump again, we often hear this criticism. The U.S. was too focused on the wars in the Middle East. The U.S. Is weakening because of political division domestically. The U.S. has its problems with a long-term debt, which is not sustainable. But despite all of those criticisms, and I'm sure we could list out many, many more, one thing I've noticed is people constantly say that the US is not there sufficiently in Asia or other parts of the world. And there might be some truth to that, but it is not 100% true either. For example, here in this region, even putting aside President Trump's recent visit to Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan, the United States continues to have security relationships. It's a treaty ally with South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, and has very close security relationships with several other countries in the region. It's a major investor in several countries in Asia. It has free trade agreements with several countries, and it's here. And I think the countries in the region, they want the United States to be here. Nobody's telling the United States to get lost or there's too much of America. If anything, they want more attention from the United States. And again, there could be a legitimate criticism at times that the United States level of engagement with this part of the world or other parts of the world, whether that was South America or Africa, is insufficient. But I think the reality shows that the United States continues to be heavily engaged in this part of the world.
Well, could that be because the United States has finally reached a point where it's overstretched? I mean, resources aren't infinite. There's a finite amount of diplomats. There's a finite amount of bandwidth in Washington, D.C. to deal with foreign policy. And there's a finite amount of resources to be able to spread around. So this period of having their hand in every cookie jar, now some cookie jars are a little too far away or a little too far on the ledge to reach towards. Is the U.S. overstretched, basically?
Certainly, the U.S. has to give its attention to lots of regions of the world, and for a long time, we've heard the U.S. is going to really extract itself from a heavy role in the Middle East. We've been hearing that ever since President Obama's administration, which began in January of 2009. So it's already been a long time. But events have transpired, whether that was the rise of ISIS, all the way to more recently the war in Gaza, that the U.S. has to be heavily involved in the Middle East and the countries in the region. The leading countries, the Gulf countries, for example, Egypt, Israel, they want the U.S. to be involved in the region. So the U.S. really hasn't left the Middle East. But that doesn't mean the U.S. isn't diverting or devoting attention to other parts of the world as well. And yeah, resources are limited. They are certainly not unlimited. But the nature of a democracy like the United States and an economy that's fairly open, despite President Trump's recent imposition of higher tariffs on many trading partners, is there are a number of stakeholders who participate in the conversation as well as in bringing about action.
Now, obviously, Trump's America First policy, and I shouldn't say withdrawal from multilateralism, but more favoritism towards bilateral diplomacy, that leader-to-leader handshake that President Trump really likes. It seems that that's feeding into this understanding a lot. Do you agree with that? And also, the recent meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, how do you evaluate that bilateral?
Well, it's a fact that President Trump doesn't like multilateral organizations, and that view predates President Trump's first or second presidency. Conservatives in the United States have been very skeptical of organizations like the United Nations and the World Health Organization and others for literally decades, and frankly, for good reason as well. These organizations are often bloated, bureaucratic. The U.S. has spent a lot of money on these organizations, and sometimes these organizations are anti-American, frankly. So President Trump's dislike for multilateral organizations, it's well known. He doesn't like to attend these meetings. He leaves early sometimes, whether that's the G7 or the G20, or more recently, APEC meeting in South Korea, where he didn't stay for the entire group of events with the other leaders. But we also see, whether one likes President Trump or not, it's obvious that leaders around the world, they want to meet with him. And that's because they want to do business with the United States, frankly. Other countries have a security priority that they also want to be in a security relationship with the United States as well. So whether it's right of center leaders or left of center leaders, I mean, right here in Asia, there's a new president in South Korea. He's left of center. And the history with left of center presidents in South Korea is that they are skeptical of American power, a little skeptical of the US military presence in South Korea, and eager to have rapprochement with North Korea. And notwithstanding that, we see that the South Korea president has gotten off to a really good one on one relationship with President Trump. He had a successful visit to the White House in August, and followed by successful meetings when President Trump recently visited. Or to use another example, Prime Minister Starmer in the UK, again, a left of center prime minister who's had a success as far as his one-on-one relationship with President Trump. So we do see leaders around the world recognize that they have to deal with the United States, regardless of who the president is or what the president's policies are, and they take it from there.
Mm-hmm. The current state of the geopolitical global order, how would you identify it? Is it still unipolar? Have we now entered into a bipolar, tripolar? Is it a multipolar world, as many people say it is?
It would be foolish to deny that with the rise of China as an economic power and increasingly as a military power, that the world is in a multipolar situation. There's also other blocs like the European Union, obviously, especially because despite its many problems, it does have a unified policy typically, whether that's a foreign policy or a trade policy. African countries, Muslim countries, through their multilateral organizations, are working closely together. There's trade agreements in South America, like Mercosur. There's the CPTPP, which brings together countries on both sides of the Pacific. So there's a number of multilateral organizations that are still operating. And even though the United States is skeptical of these organizations under President Trump, those organizations are still doing their thing, and they will look to strengthen their organizations. And I just mentioned the CPTPP trade agreement. There are countries that are lining up to join it, even though they know the United States is not likely to join anytime soon. But they'll still deal with the United States on a bilateral basis because they have to, and they want to be able to do business with the United States, or again, as I said, have a security relationship with the United States. So yes, there's multipolarism, whether that's multilateral organizations have a role, China using its influence, but clearly the United States is still also a leader.
Mm-hmm. 2028, there's going to be obviously U.S. elections again. In the event the Republicans do win, whether it's Vice President J.D. Vance or another Republican to come out of the primaries and win the election, do you think that Donald Trump's America First policy will continue, or is that more an administration policy? We'll see a more traditional establishment Republican foreign policy going forward?
The reality is the Republican Party is the party of President Trump and his ideas on various policy issues, whether that's trade, such as with higher tariffs, or more recently, this new approach, especially for Republicans, of intervention with the government taking stakes in companies. That really goes against American conservative thinking, that the government would do that. And tough on immigration. These policy ideas now are really standard Republican Party ideas. It'll be very difficult in the 2028 primary for somebody to win who's saying Trump is all wrong. I want to go back to free trade. I want to be open to immigration. I'm going to work with multilateral organizations, even though my goal is to maintain the primacy of the U.S. position. That's probably not going to be a winning argument in the Republican primary. I would expect the candidates to take the safe lane, which is to say that I'm continuing Trump's policies, and also it's worth emphasizing that even if a Democrat were to win the 2028 U.S. presidential election, some of the Trump policies they're very likely to keep. And we don't have to look very far back for an example. President Biden kept a number of Trump's tariffs, specifically with regard to China. and implemented other types of controls on doing business with China, especially in the tech space. He also tried to work together with other countries to counter China's influence. And those were mostly initiatives that began under the first Trump administration. Obviously, Democrats have very different ideas on things like renewable energy and Biden's policies. And he had the benefit of a Democrat-controlled Congress the first 2 years of his presidency, so he could pass a lot of spending bills for things like renewable energy that he wanted to. So certainly a Republican will keep much of Trump's policies. Even a Democrat will keep some, but not all.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.